Now I invite Dr. Zafar Bangash, Director, Institute of Contemporary Islamic Thought. He is a founding member of Friends of Kashmir Committee. He is the author of several books. Over to Dr. Bangash.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, and a welcome to my fellow Canadians as well, Karen, Robert, Phil, longtime associates in struggle for justice and peace in the world. And of course, thanks to the Acting High Commissioner, Mr. Shahbaz Malik, as well as to Consul General, Mr. Abdul Hameed. In the Kashmiris' long history of struggle, there are very many grim milestones, but January 5th actually offers a ray of hope, in the sense that it was on January 5th, 1949, when the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan passed this resolution. And of course, this commission was established by the United Nations Security Council to look into the situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this resolution that was passed on January 5th provided the legal basis for the future settlement of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was basically, or in essence, categorically stated that there should be a referendum or a plebiscite held in Jammu and Kashmir to determine the wishes of the people, to ascertain as to whether they wish to become part of Pakistan or wish to remain in India. Now we need to step back a little bit and reflect on the events of October of 1947, when Indian troops illegally invaded and occupied large parts of Jammu and Kashmir. India's excuse that they advanced at the time was that their forces had landed in Srinagar at the invitation of the Maharaja Hari Singh, but the ruler, who was a tyrannical ruler, had already fled the state in the face of an uprising by the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And so this Maharaja really had no legal, moral, or political authority to invite Indian occupation forces into the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In any case, as pointed out by Alistair Lamb, the British author, nobody has actually seen this so-called instrument of accession. So it seems as if that was just an excuse or a ruse used by India in connivance, unfortunately, with the British, that the Indian forces invaded the state of Jammu and Kashmir. As Karen pointed out, it was India that took the matter to the UN Security Council, and therefore India is obliged under its own actions to abide by the resolutions of the Security Council, of which there are at least 12 that call for a referendum in Jammu and Kashmir. I want to mention two other aspects as well. And the first is that when the Indian forces landed in Jammu and Kashmir on October 27th, 1947, according to British media reports, they perpetrated a horrible massacre in Jammu, in which an estimated 350,000 or more Kashmiris were slaughtered, and an equal number of Kashmiris were pushed out of that region into what is Pakistan. So within a matter of a few days, the demographic composition of Jammu, which was a predominantly Muslim area, constituting something like 61% of the population, was reduced to a minority in at least one region of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And similar moves are underway in the Kashmir Valley today, where demographic changes are underway in order to turn the indigenous Kashmiri people into a minority. Of course, this is something that we need to not only condemn, but to draw the attention of the global community so that the rights of the Kashmiri people are not violated in such a blatant manner. Another aspect that I think we need to keep in mind, and that is that soon after the Second World War, when the United Nations came into existence, a number of countries starting from that time all the way up to the 60s gained independence. So immediately after the Second World War, because of the bloodletting in Europe, where many of these European colonial powers had been weakened and they could no longer continue to hold on to their colonial possessions in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, a number of countries emerged. So in 1945, there were 73 members of the United Nations. Today, there are 193. That means in the intervening period, 120 countries gained independence. Regrettably, in two regions of the world, Kashmir and Palestine, exactly the opposite happened. Again, unfortunately, with British intrigue. So in Kashmir, the British and the Indians connived in order to deprive the people of Jammu and Kashmir of their inalienable right to choose their own destiny. In Palestine as well, in fact, in a much worse way, that in Palestine, through the connivance of the United Nations General Assembly, the alien invaders were allowed to settle into Palestine against the wishes of the indigenous people. In case of the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, at least there are Security Council resolutions that call for a referendum in that state so that the people can determine their own future. Now, the question is, why is it that the United Nations, that represents the will of 193 countries today, is unable to get the right of self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir that lies on its own statute books? Unfortunately, the reality is that while on the moral basis and on the legal basis, the people of Jammu and Kashmir have both on their side, in terms of global politics, regrettably, the world does not operate on the basis of right. It operates on the basis of might and self-interest. And that is the tragedy that we face today. We also face this situation in Canada, where, as was pointed out by Karen, that a Canadian diplomat, Andrew McNaughton, was the one who maneuvered this resolution in the Security Council for the right of self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. In our interactions with Canadian elected representatives, we have communicated the issue of Jammu and Kashmir in very clear terms to them. We have held meetings with many of them, but regrettably, they are unwilling to take a public stand against India and to support their own stated policy of the right of self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. What those of us who are Canadian citizens and residing here in Canada, we have an obligation to engage with the civil society groups, to bring them on board, to sensitize them to this issue. And I can say that we have had considerable success in this respect. The panelists that are present today are a testimony to this. We need to develop that pressure from the ground up so that we can pressurize our elected representatives to take a stand on the matter of principle, which is a principle of self-determination, which is enshrined in the UN Charter as well as the International Human Rights Declaration. As we speak, there are in fact 2 genocide watches, active genocide watches relating to Kashmir. As we speak, there are 2 detailed reports issued by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, one in the year 2018, the second one in 2019, and even subsequently. Based with all of this information, it should be logical to expect that the elected representatives in Canada would support the right of self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and that they ought to be upfront. But regrettably, we do not find that. So what we have to do is, as I mentioned, we have to continue to work with civil society groups, to build up that ground pressure, that public pressure from the community, so that we will impress upon our elected representatives that they ought to take the issue of Jammu and Kashmir seriously, and to allow the people of Jammu and Kashmir to hold that referendum so that they can determine their own future. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.